Hi, I'm Mikey. This is Tyler. We're the founders of Innovative Start Organization, also known as ISO, and we're a nonprofit that teaches financial literacy. In these videos, we're here to inform, not persuade. We got a couple topics to talk to you guys about over some recent news around the federal interest rates and also student loans. Two big things that have came out over the past week. By the time this video goes up, you guys will probably already have had started paying your loans back and or feel the impact of as far as like hold steady that Fed interest rates are going on. So I'll have Tyler talk more about the Fed interest rates once we jump into that, and then also like I said, we'll come back into the loans and what it means as far as like the upcoming repayments and interest rates and everything else that'll go along with that. But like I said, to get started off, we're going to talk about the Fed interest rates. Tyler, I'm going to go ahead and let you pop off on that real quick.
Yeah, so the Fed held steady this time, which was interesting. A lot of people, um, if you looked at some of the like probability markets, a majority of the people that were betting certain ways on this thought that they would hold steady. It was interesting though, because Trump last week, I believe, went to the Federal Reserve office and he's been pushing Powell pretty hard on lowering rates. But, with inflation ticked up, I think above estimates either last last month, the month before,
Mhm.
they're still holding them steady. I think also some are saying that it's too soon to know what the tariffs, what it's going to do, if it will make things cost more inflationary or not. Um, it's this is all really interesting, and I saw an opinion today that some people think it's just too early to cut, and maybe in September, I believe, is the next cut will be time. Um, but it'll uh, it, time will tell, that's for sure. And I think people are starting to normalize some, these interest rates. The crazy thing is like I think it was like what um the 70s, I believe, or the 80s, they had uh, and we can look this up here in a second. They had like 14, 15% interest rates for mortgages. So obviously there was different, that was different times, but man, it's really interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on with the home markets. A lot of the markets are starting to drop around the country. Certain areas are holding steady, but Florida, Texas, things like that, those markets are dropping pretty quick. Saw an area of Atlanta that some of the home prices are back to 2018 levels, which is really interesting. So definitely a lot going on with that and how that's playing out in effect. Obviously, the current United States administration wants those rates lowered as much as possible. For those that may not know, which is totally fine, some believe they have a theory that lower interest rates will increase demand in the economy and get money moving around. The higher interest rates are, that will incentivize savings. So let's say you have $1,000 in a savings account, you'll make more money with saving it and keeping it in that account when interest rates are high versus when interest rates are low. There's no point. You could potentially get a better return somewhere else.
Right.
So uh, it's very, very interesting situation to say the least. And I think it's dramatized right now because the current administration is drawing so much attention to this.
Hmm. Yeah, because in reality, right, the whole reason why the administration is doing so is because uh, the economy and how it is prospering or not really reflects on, what they've been doing as an administration as a whole, like, what laws that they're passing, what have entirely as a whole, right? What have they done to better the economy? Because then it looks good on their polling numbers and everything else, right? So that's why they will push for lower interest rates. Now, to go back to what Tyler is saying, right? It's a give and take because with the lower interest rates, you're going to have increased consumer spending potentially because, right, people can, afford to buy houses and yada yada things like that that overall boost the economy as far as like, hey, there's spending going on. We can, you know, be able to measure that. Now, as far as like the higher interest rates, that's when people, as I was saying, will be saving and everything else. So it's extremely important that you understand really like what it means in the grand scheme, right? The federal interest rates have a huge impact. And again, to reiterate, the Federal Reserve, right, and Powell, who's in charge of that right now, they are not right tied to the government. So one thing you have to realize is that while it may look like there's political influence and everything else like that, it is up to him to not have any bias in that sense and to do best what's best for the economy. Um, from if I'm not mistaken, I don't think him and the current administration see eye to eye. So that's another interesting thing that really plays into that. Tyler, I don't know if you've seen that video of them when he was there visiting, but yeah, it was very
Yes.
interesting to see that. That was hilarious. um, but if you have not seen that, I'll go and check that out. That has nothing to do with the what our talking points are. But yeah, anyways, to kind of wrap up on that point, it's extremely interesting again, like just to understand what it is, right? When those things are announced, that's how you get ahead of the curve, right? So if you find out that they're lowering interest rates, right, now you can get ahead of the curve and say, hey, you've been looking at this house you want to buy. That's a great opportunity to start, getting back into the market, right? The fact that it's more of a we're gonna wait and see kind of viewpoint, so nothing changed essentially as far as those interest rates go, is because there needs, in reality, and how we said it in last videos, is that there is no key answer onto what interest rates should be because they have to see what comes out of that quarter, right? So they'll set it and then adjust for those numbers as far as it goes to say like, okay, this quarter, this is what we've seen for like job reports, this is what we've seen for, added value within the market and yada yada, all those potential factors that may impact the decision within the Federal Reserve of hiring or lowering interest rates, and then that goes into effect the next. So what happened is the interest rate that was decided on now is based on last quarter's data, essentially. But anything else you want to add
Yeah,
to
I'm
that,
just
Tyler?
yeah, I just want to correct myself real quick. As you were talking, I was just getting some info. In the 1980s, the weekly interest rate went all the way up to 16 16.64%. That's pretty crazy. That's double where we're at now.
Hmm.
But again, from my understanding, the the price, the salary wages were a different percentage of home prices, if that makes sense. And I think there was also a difference in supply of homes. So
Hmm.
that's one thing. All these headlines and all this clickbait stuff going on here, I fall for it sometimes. We just got to be aware that since COVID, salaries, from my understanding, salaries are the last thing to really increase as inflation and things like that have increased a lot. And the percentage of salaries compared to home values now, that's what's really getting a lot of people. And when they say someone can't afford a home, between savings amounts that people have and also their salaries compared to the percentage of a home value or home price, that's really what's getting a lot of people. And also you have the supply situation we have going on right now. Anyway,
Hmm.
that's the last thing.
Yeah, there's a lot. And we can really get to Tyler as far as like some of that real estate outlook too as well. I think another thing to kind of add on there too is when you really think about it, especially like the housing market and everything else. I think when I was in school, we were learning about some rule of thumbs for affording certain like large purchases. And when we were looking at buying a house, mind you, this is like when I was like 15 or 16 when we were learning about this. Some knowledge that was just way past me. So I was like, I ain't buying a house anytime soon, right? Uh, Double the amount of income you make, right? And in a time where, your income could match inflation rates or at least was on par with it, that makes a lot of sense. I do think that's probably like an old ideology because a lot now, if you look at houses, like you can get you a square shack and that thing be 200, thousand, $300,000, and it's barely 1,000 square feet. Like that's where the ridiculousness comes in. You look at home buyers, maybe your grandparents or if you have older parents, right? In that 80s, 90s range, if you go look at some of the house values or some of the old property values for that versus like what they're selling for now or what they may have sold for, right? Now, people be like, okay, that's significant. And they be like, oh, it's probably because, the value of the dollar or whatever else. No, you go and calculate for inflation, and it's you're gonna still be shocked and all because you're gonna be like, that is ridiculous, right? A $200,000 house in the 90s should not be selling for 1.2 million, in today's world. That is ridiculous. And that is not even, an exaggeration. That's just an example that you can go on Zillow or whatever website you want to go into and go look at the, past property values of what it sold for and yada yada like. And Tyler could probably speak onto that too as well. But um, pay attention to those things. I know our generation has been seen as people who probably won't own, but more so rent. I don't know if that's the case for everybody, and I don't know what that kind of like speech set, but I think it also just plays into the part that we're not making as much money to afford these homes as prior generations were. So it's a lot harder. And I think Tyler and I are more so on the older side of our generation, that being Gen Z. But yeah, like I doubt any of the younger people that come, after us are gonna look at that market the same as far as like what those, home values are because future generations will be like, hey, that house is 1.2 million. It's four now. What are you talking about? You could have bought it at 1.2. So, yeah. But to go into our next topic, off that side note, talking about student loans, this has been really, 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 really huge. I think it's been big since probably the pandemic, really. When they first got paused and everything else, like this has been a huge topic, right? The Department of Education, especially when Doge was coming through and a lot of things got kind of, upended there. Always, always, always been a heavy topic, also a touchy topic. As far as like student loans go and, what happens with them and everything else. The ideology, right? You go to your college, you master a field and then you get some type of job. A lot of people argue about what you master in that field and why you can or you can get a job and whatever else. Besides the point is, right? As an 18-year-old, you sign off on, 20, 30, 40 plus thousands of dollars without having any knowledge of the impact of you once you get out of that, right? So, really, really hitting on, why is it important to understand student loans, what they mean to you? I think in reality, I've talked to people who went to school, worked throughout, and it took them a little bit longer. Maybe they didn't graduate within that 4 years. Maybe it took them six, or so years because they wanted to make sure they had no student loans. Um, if you're lucky enough, you get those scholarships, you work hard and you go into programs and everything else where you don't have to pay. That's good. The smart way to go about it, and again, that opportunity is not for everybody, but if you can get those grants and everything else, do all that, and then live within your means. Um, I get that this is, and again, for our audience of college students now and those getting into, college, or if that's the case, uh, look at it as right a growth opportunity to save and everything else. You don't have to, live in the best place or whatever. Living in some of the places I did, I was like, and in other places, I'm like, okay, this is a little bougie. So if you really look at it, it just live within your means. That's all I got to say. Previous episodes, we've also talked about budgeting, as a college student and some of the expenses that you face and everything else. It is extremely hard as a college student unless you come from a background of privilege to even save and do all these things else. You're really living a paycheck to paycheck, if you're working within college or whatever else, how your means of living is. So to kind of jump into that about the whole student loan impact. So starting, I'm pretty sure this coming month, we'll have those repayments starting back up. The SAVE plan and the other IDRs or income driven repayment plans um, will be kind of like washed away as far as it goes. Interest rates will start back. If your accounts were in forbearance, which I'm pretty sure was a lot of borrowers, I think they said it's like, I forgot how many million people are going to restart their payments, but the huge issue and pushback with this, right, is that the economy as a whole, as far as like how much money people are making, and like job opportunities for those who have graduated or are recently graduating, is that they one probably don't have a job where they can pay for their own living and pay for their loans, right? Or two, they've paid their student loans for a very long time and they've gotten to the point where they've paid the original loan amount off, but then with all the incurred interest of having to pay that over time, they still have ten, $20,000 left. And it gets worse if you ever see like doctors or whatever else, how much they owe in student loans, it can get ridiculous. Um, One thing that you can look at, I think one of the things that we look at here, caps on how much you can borrow. Looks like they have this grad plus loan program will be eliminated. Also, I remember the parent plus loans that never applied to me. I don't know anybody else that applied to either, but there's also been some changes to that as well. And then impact on individuals. So, uh, private loans versus federal loans. One big thing is like one, if your loans are federal, right, they're impacted by all of these things that we've talked about, especially in previous episodes. Private loans, not so much. So when people look at like student loan forgiveness and everything else, that doesn't apply to private loans. Our discussion on what loans are, the student loans now, are mostly going to be based on federal loans. Obviously, private loans are not impacted by anything that the government does. That's mostly whatever you sign or your parents sign up for whenever you get those loans. Uh, One of the, like I said, one of the big things is that you can have a push for private lenders, especially if interest rates are lower or they have like better opportunities. I think one thing that you can get out of your federal student loans is that the interest rate that you get whenever you accept that loan is set for the entire loan time. Now, with that being said, everybody doesn't pay the same interest rate, or not necessarily pay the same interest rate, but incur the same interest. That changes, right, when the economy changes. So, your 4 years of undergrad is not going to be the same as the person after you or before you, as far as what that interest was. But yeah, I think overall, especially as somebody who has student loans and is impacted by this too, the interesting thing is, right, is that incurring interest part. At the end of the day, right, how a loan works is you say, hey, I need this amount of money. These are my loan terms, whether that's 10, 15 years. Student loans don't really have, as far as like a linked term, you just pay them off as you go. And that's also another issue is because even though it takes you some time to pay off the principal amount, you still incur interest and then end up having to pay, you know, plus then some over time. But any thoughts on that, Taylor?
Yeah, I'm just looking at mine. Do you know? I swear my interest. I've some student loans, and I thought the interest rates were higher than what they are now, which is a good thing, I guess. I need to look into if those changed or what. Um, you said they stay the same, so maybe
Yeah, I
maybe
think
I
I
was
think
wrong.
I don't even know. I think my highest rate is probably like 5%, possibly.
Hmm.
I've heard people have like in the nines and tens, but like I said, it's really
Jeez,
shaped
that
on
is that
who the
private?
lender. Yeah, it could be private, but also depends
Yeah,
on when you take out your loans, right? Because I think
that's true.
in reality, interest rates probably change based on where the economy is, because again, it's a federal loan, so you're getting it from that perspective. Um,
Well,
but
whenever we graduated, like the interest wasn't accruing, right? I
mhm,
forgot how long was that time period? Like, was it like a year or something? I don't
it
like.
was
There was a time.
it took them a while because it started during um, Biden's administration, right? And I think it followed through all the way up until the end, to be honest, because they were trying to, as far as discussion talks and everything else, they were trying to find a way to make it one just easier to repay the loans, right? And that's why they paused incurring interest. Um, I think from a perspective, if it's in my opinion, right? Uh, I get the interest aspect, but also at the same time, it's a gimmick in the sense that it's not guaranteed that you'll be able to pay that back. Now, if I took out, say for example, 10,000 in loans, and then that was just the amount, and I didn't incur any interest, that'll be way easier for me to pay back than say if I had it at, 5% and then it's taking me over time to pay off that interest and it's occurring every single year on that 5%. Now I'm paying more plus, right? And then we go back to that conversation we were just having earlier where people's incomes are not changing. So while you're paying, more over time, you're not making more over time. That's the big issue. And again, opinions on the matter as far as like, well, that's, people's fault that they took out student loans. Nobody told them to go to school, anything else. School is obviously a way to create an opportunity for yourself. Not every time, school is for everybody. And again, Tyler and I have talked in previous videos about trade school, other things, people become entrepreneurs. There's other ways as far as like creating opportunities for yourself, but a more majority of Americans, right, choose a college kind of like lifestyle as far as creating that opportunity. It's really drilled into you throughout school from your K through 12, you know, this. I think there's many factors. It needs to be talked about more instead of trying to push students to get into college, maybe making sure that they know all the opportunities they have to make sure that they can afford it in the first place. Uh, just like I also saw this other thing too. Um, think of it too as if you're buying a car, right? If you can buy a nice car for money that you saved up with, and then you don't have to, right, worry about any payments over time, incurring interest. That interest that you have to pay over time, invested, or money that you can spend at that point, is going to be worth way more than you spending it over that time. It's just the time value of money. So in reality, right, whenever you're taking that huge expense up front or whatever else, um, is just interesting because at the same time, you're not. A lot of students don't pay off their student loans as they're in school, right? Which is also another great opportunity if you can afford to do that. Again, a college student levels the playing field for a lot of people. You don't really have a lot of money to just be like, oh yeah, I can pay $200-300, and really that'd just be interest, depending on how much your loans are. So, like, at what point, does it help, right? Because you have to pay a certain amount to cover the interest and also make a dent into the principal. So that's the hard point, right? Um, if you can't do that and you're just fighting the interest, you're really just like digging in an endless hole because you're never going to get to paying it off. Um, and some people are lucky, right? They graduate, they get a good job, and then they live way below their means so they can pay it off. People that pay off their student loans, it gives you like this self thing, and I think a lot of the arguments is like, oh, hey, I paid off my student loans, these people should be able to, and at the same time it's like yes, but at the same time it's like okay, but if you want to create growth within the economy, you want the economy to be better for these people that are making their way right into adulthood and being working citizens and everything else, you're going to see this major dip because one, the economy as a whole, once they enter it, the housing market is not there for them. You got job opportunities that are not there for them, and then just pay as a whole, right? You can look up now, but in reality, if you're not in a a dual income household, the a lot of things that you can afford as far as that goes changes drastically. So um, back then, when you were able to live on one income and afford a house, a nice neighborhood, a good school system, everything else. That's just the troublesome aspect that some of these people face as far as like becoming adults. Even people older than us are probably in that same predicament. But the reality is, again, like student loans are extremely important to understand before you get into them. I don't think, as far as like college counselors and everything else, really emphasize the importance of understanding what those student loans mean. At least for my college counselor for the school I went to, I couldn't remember her saying anything about, the impact of student loans, if I was to get things from hospital, like what is it going to look like, my financial package and everything else. It was more so, hey, these are tools to help you find the perfect school to go to, and let us know if you want to get your application fees waived. So, uh, really, really, really need to stress the importance of that within schools and those graduating seniors to make sure that they're utilizing all of their things. And that should be like once somebody's old enough to, start working part time or whatever that is as a student, 15 to, that should be something that's getting pushed into them now. Like, hey, I know it's a couple years from now, but where do you feel like you want to be at as far as like whether that's in college, whether that's in a trade school, whether that's, some other business venture or whatever else, like what does that look like to you so that we can get a better understanding if saving is important right now to make sure you can, afford to go to college without having to take on so much student loans, or, maybe there's some programs you can get in for dual enrollment in high school, the most clutch thing you can do. If a class offers that, please, I'm telling you, them college credit hours that I took for dual enrollment in high school, I think it was like for 3 credits, $192. You're not getting that anywhere else. And it translated across any school that I, wanted to go to. It was basically a prerequisite for a lot of like the
That's in Missouri.
college. Yeah, yeah, in Missouri.
Yeah,
So
Missouri.
if your school offers that, most definitely take advantage of that. I remember I was talking to kids, and if it was offered, they come in with like 60 credits, and I'm like, wow, no student loan debt, anything, just because they dual enrolled or they went to community college first. You can knock out a lot of those gen eds, which is going to be mostly your first 2 years of university if you have no incoming credit. So extremely important to really exhaust your options. Anything else to add on that aspect? Just student loans in general
I
and
was
stuff.
just real quick. So the student loans I have are federal student loans. I'm looking at this right now. Is the reason why the interest rate has changed because um, it says interest rates on federal student loans are set by Congress. So
Mhm.
that's one thing. Like you have public, or I guess the way we look at this is like public student loans, so like federal student loans, and you have like private student loans, which are like private businesses. So I know SoFi has like really been advertising a lot
Mhm.
lately, or other types of companies. So just something to know as you're navigating throughout all this. This is good. This is all for mine.
Mhm. Yeah, extremely important. So, to wrap up on today's episode, one, going back into the federal interest rates, uh, pay extremely close attention to those. Extremely, 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 can I emphasize how much importance it is to understand how they impact you as an individual slash consumer within the U.S. Um, and in reality, again, like I said, it depends on what your goals are, long term, short term. Those interest rates play a huge part into the everyday activities you have, spending habits, anything that you can look at as far as like your growth goals within buying a house or getting a car or whatever else. Those interest rates really go and impact all of those things. Again, we'll probably have another episode down the line when the next announcement comes out, where we're talking about whether that's they raise them or they lower them, what that'll look like. And then to wrap up on that piece too, just some of the student loan aspects, importance of understanding right before you even get into college or just taking on a loan in general, right? I understand the terms. Is it something that you really, 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 really can do with or without? Really exhaust all of your options. Don't just take the easy route forward. If there's things that you have to push for and to do all that, trust me, you're gonna thank yourself, 4 to 5 years from now when you're not paying the hefty amount that student loans can incur in interest and everything else that goes with that. So look at programs within high school, dual enroll within high school, and also don't leave out the community college. Uh,
Yes.
if you knock that out, I don't. Missouri at least had like this A+ program. My younger sister did that. I don't know if they have that in like the other states and stuff, but if they have programs like that where they pay for your first 2 years of college or whatnot, guarantee you most definitely should use that because like you'll save so much money up front. I probably incurred most of my student loan within my first 2 years of college, just based off of all the gen eds that I had to take and everything else that was not related to my major that you just basically have to almost repeat, or as far as like prerequisites and everything else that you have to have. So exhaust all your options. But anything from you, Tyler, before we wrap up? All right. We appreciate you guys for watching. Please tune in next week for our next episode. And also, please go and subscribe and like and let us know if there's anything that you guys want us to talk about. And if you have any comments on some of the student loans aspects, some of your experience with those, and also your general understanding of the federal interest rates, that's something that you pay attention to, or if you've been impacted, like as far as like, house shopping or whatever else that you may be doing that has been, impacted by the federal interest rate. But we're gonna leave you guys and peace. Appreciate it.